calls and he says, whoever wrote the press release, I want him to come work at the factory, and I'd like him to just sit there with a typewriter and write about everything that goes on every day. So I said, I'll take that job. And that was my first time ever working for an artist. And, I thought, having studied the Renaissance and studying all of this business of being an apprentice, like even Leonardo was an apprentice at one point, and I thought, I'm an apprentice to Andy Warhol. And I said, this is great. And so after about 2 weeks, and honestly coming from where I come from, which was a very small town in Massachusetts, not far from Boston, apple trees, fishing, in the brook, and cows and all that kind of stuff. So I get down there and I'm typing and I'm writing. Today they had foie gras. I don't know, have no idea what it is, but it's like they had foie gras and then they had this and then they had that. And then one day they came in and they had that print of Diana Ross. And there was like a little white dot in her hair. And apparently the ink didn't go over it well. And so they asked me if I could fix it. They said, do you know how to paint? And I said, yeah, I do. And they said, okay. They gave me a bottle cap with a little brush and the black paint, and I just put a dot where the white spot was. And they all stood around in a circle and they said, my God, wow, you're such a great artist, And I was like, okay. And I was like, these guys are really crazy. And then they said, do you know how to silk screen? I said, yeah, I do. I did it. I've done silk screens on T-shirts. I know how to do silk screens. So I then joined the silk screen operation. And I worked there for 9 months, and I was a diamond duster. And so I diamond dusted the entire series of the Myths, and in 1981, 80 and 81. And I think we did probably 5,000 prints, okay, plus the canvases, and it was absolutely just, Andy never showed up. He never came down. It was on Duane Street. It wasn't up in what everyone knows as the factory, up on Union Square, 18th Street. And so it was just completely like 10 o'clock in the morning, you got there, and then it was almost like somebody had a whip and just like, just worked us to death until midnight. And then at midnight, what we would do is we would crunch up all the prints that didn't look right and put them in a big garbage bag. And me and this kid, Michael, we would take them all down 5 flights of stairs and throw them in a huge dumpster. And they were piled like that high of Andy Warhols every single day in the dumpster that are probably worth billions of dollars today, I mean, if anyone were to find them. And they weren't bad. They were just, the screen went off, or there wasn't enough ink, or something like that. So I did that for 9 months, and I only met Andy Warhol twice during that period of time. And once was just to stand there with a roll, like a blueprint, because from then they worked from blueprints. And so I handed the blueprint to Rupert, who handed the blueprint to Andy. Andy looked at the blueprint, he said, okay. He gave me the blueprint and I walked away. And went again another time, and this time it was when we were finished with all the prints, and he was at Ronald Feldman Gallery, I remember, and who was the producer of most of his prints back then. And so Andy walks in and he just sees stacks and stacks and stacks of prints. And he just looks around and there were loads and loads of boxes. And he said, oh, he said, what is this, box art? And like box art? And he was very funny, and that was it. The only, he didn't recognize me at all, didn't know me, I was just a nobody. And, I met John Bishalby like 3 years before I met Keith. And so around 83, 84, one time Keith and Andy Warhol walked into an East Village gallery in 83 And both of them bought like 4 paintings of mine. So I was very impressed. I said, okay, maybe I'm not a critic's artist, but at least I'm an artist. And so if they like it, I'm quite happy about that, you know, that's great. And so then...
But you never told Warhol that you had worked with him when eventually you became...
No, and then when I finally did meet Keith, you know, I was working at his studio. He would come to Paris, work at mine, and I would come to New York and work at his. And then he said, Andy wants to meet you. I said, all right, but don't tell him I worked for him, okay? He's not going to recognize me. Just don't tell him I ever worked for him. And so he came in and, you know, he took a lot of photographs of me at Keith's working there and hanging out there and everything. And we were going to exchange artworks in '87. He wanted to trade. And he asked me how I'd like to have my portrait done. And I said, could you do a paint by number version? And I said, I love those paint by number paintings, you know. And he said, oh, I haven't done one of those in a long time. That'd be interesting. And so I could have had a paint by number painting done of my portrait, but he died, unfortunately. It was right around then that he died. He went into the hospital, had his gallbladder thing happen, and then he never came out. Louder? Oh, sorry.
That was a sad.
My voice isn't very good.
No, we actually, I want to switch gear for a last question and then